Ideomotor Apraxia by Elisa Plasencia Avila. Let's begin by talking about apraxia. Apraxia is defined as the inability to perform skilled, purposeful movements in the absence of motor power, sensation, or coordination. There is many kinds of apraxias, but we're going to go into detail into ideomotor apraxia today. Ideomotor apraxia is the inability to imitate gestures or purposeful motor tasks on command, although that patient fully understands the idea or the concept of the task. For example, if you are waving at somebody, they fully know what you're doing, but they're unable to perform that task back. So they're not going to wave back at you because they can't perform that action successfully. Let's go ahead and get started with the methods of evaluation. Here's a little side note to help you understand what praxis means. So praxis is the ability to spontaneously conceive of, organize, or carry out unfamiliar motor actions. Before performing the praxis test, here are some things you should do. You should perform a detailed assessment of the client's sensory and physical functioning, such as knowing the language status of your patient. Maybe consult with a speech pathologist if needed. Number 2, evaluate visual agnosia prior to the test to rule out any difficulties with object recognition that could be causing this poor performance. Number 3, evaluate the motor planning skills of both hands whenever possible. And number 4, observe if the client is bothered by his or her errors, causing for this patient to get frustrated. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with the dynamic assessments. The patient is given a task, directions, and objects on table needed. Patient is to perform the task in any way. And then the OT writes down the task steps, the results, the number of cues, and the type of cues. So if you look on your right-hand corner, that is how it is evaluated. So let's look at the second one. It says butter the bread and cut it in half. So in the on the table, you'll have a knife, a spoon, a fork, a plate, butter, bread, and cream cheese, sugar. So the task steps that you should perform are: you select the knife, you hold the knife properly, you open the butter, you put butter on knife, spreads butter on bread, repeats spreading, and cuts the bread. So the results are talking about how the patient performed it. So an E stands for the examiner performs the step even with cues. Client is unable to perform this step. The client performs step in an awkward and clumsy manner without cues, which that's the little dot. The C means client performs step with cues. And the O, client performed the steps without cues. And then you go on to the next row, and it says number of cues, and then you write how many cues they wrote. You had to tell them for every single step, and then the type of cues. So for the opens the butter, that person had 2 cues, and the type of cue they had was a PG cue, and the PG cue stands for the P, visually focusing attention by pointing, and the G, visual gesturing action without object, and so on and so forth with every task you give this person, and they only have 30 minutes to complete each task. Here's another evaluation performed. It is called the Natural Action Test, or the NAT. It is an occupation-based evaluation. In this evaluation, the patient performs 3 tasks with the maximum time to complete each task being 30 minutes. Those tasks include making toast and coffee, wrapping a gift, and packing a lunchbox. Physical assistance is given when needed after the client has clearly indicated his or her intention to perform an action. Acceptable initiation cues, generic cues, and time-based cues are described in the test manual. So whenever you're performing this test, you're able to see such things. The client is scored for accomplishment of steps performed as well as selected errors. There's a maximum score of 18 after you add the error and the accomplishment scores together. Here are the treatments for Ideomotor Apraxia. The remedial treatment of Ideomotor Apraxia is one in which the therapist places hand over the client and guides him or her through the required task. After frequently doing this, the patient's recognition will elicit and it will make more sense, and he may be able to take over the normal sequence of movement. Another treatment is training in object usage and gestures with the therapist. So after introducing them to the object and how it's used and the gestures, you increase the level of difficulty by handling the objects, then by being shown pictures of object in use, and lastly, seeing object pictures and they sign their use of the object or this gesture. The compository treatment begins with the strategy training that is utilized to train generalization of the skills. This treatment is based on 3 stages of model of action. So by initiating or orienting, then execution, and then controlling and correcting, patients were taught to compensate internally, such as self-verbalization, or externally by pictorial cues. Another compensatory treatment is when they have the patient close his or her eyes and visualize the required movements before attempting to carry them out, which is using another type of sensory output. The last compensatory treatment that I have listed on here is to utilize cue cards with this patient and tape them to the objects required for everyday function. The cue cards should state what the object is and step-by-steps on instructions on how to use them. Using picture cards would also be very helpful for them.